In the summer of 1985, a traffic cop named Daniel Harris pulled over a speeding car near an old steel bridge and then vanished. No car, no officer, nothing. For 18 years, the town lived on rumors. Some said he ran away. Others swore he was silenced. His family never stopped fighting, insisting Daniel would never abandon his badge. Then in 2003, that same bridge collapsed, and buried deep beneath the twisted steel, workers uncovered something in the riverbed, something that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. What they pulled from the water didn't just solve the mystery. It exposed a chilling truth no one in town was ready to face. And I'll tell you exactly what they found. But first, if you're watching this right now, hit subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. And in the comments, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? In 1985, in a quiet American town, everyone knew Officer Daniel Harris. He was 32 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and serious about his work. Daniel wasn't the kind of cop who looked for trouble. He was the kind of man who stood by the rules and made sure everyone else did too. People said he was strict, but they also said he was fair. If he gave you a ticket, he explained why. If he stopped you on the road, he treated you with respect. Daniel lived with pride in his badge. He wore his uniform pressed and spotless, his patrol car always shining. He believed the job meant more than writing tickets. To him, keeping the roads safe meant protecting families, children, and neighbors. That's how he saw it. At home, Daniel had a close bond with his younger brother, Mark. The two grew up together playing baseball in the fields near town. Even as adults, they stayed best friends. Mark often said Daniel was his hero, the big brother who always looked out for him, and Daniel took that role seriously. He never backed down from responsibility. This is why when Daniel vanished, nobody believed he would ever just walk away. Not his family, not his friends, not his brother. To them, Daniel was the kind of man who would die in his uniform before abandoning it. That made what happened next feel impossible. It was a summer night in July 1985. The sun had set, leaving the sky dim and heavy. Officer Harris was on duty, driving his patrol car through the familiar roads near the river. His shift was normal, nothing unusual, just routine calls and traffic checks. His voice came through the radio a few times that evening, calm, steady, the way it always was. He checked in with dispatch, reported his location, and gave short updates. Other officers heard him and thought nothing of it, just another shift for Daniel. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel spotted something, a car racing down the two-lane road near the old steel bridge. The bridge was old, rusty, and avoided by most locals at night, but it was part of Daniel's route. He called it in, a traffic stop near the bridge. Dispatch logged the time and the location. His tone was calm, routine. It sounded like nothing unusual, just another driver breaking the law. Daniel switched on his lights and the glow of his red and blue strobes filled the dark road. The car pulled over near the entrance to the bridge. Other officers went on with their patrols. There was no alarm. Daniel had handled hundreds of stops before, but what no one realized was that this call would be the last time anyone ever heard his voice. Within minutes, everything changed. A few minutes after Daniel called in the traffic stop, dispatch expected another update. Usually, he'd radio the license plate, maybe describe the driver, and confirm the situation was under control. But nothing came. The radio stayed quiet. Dispatch waited, thinking maybe Daniel was just busy with the driver. 5 minutes passed, then 10, still nothing. Finally, they called out to him. Unit 12, status check. Silence. They tried again. Unit 12, do you copy? No answer. Other officers nearby were alerted. Sirens switched on, lights flashing as patrol cars sped toward the bridge. The quiet night suddenly filled with the wail of police sirens. When the first units arrived, they expected to see Daniel's car pulled over behind a driver. Instead, the road was empty. The bridge stretched out in front of them, dark and silent. There was no patrol car, no headlights, no sign of Officer Harris. The officers searched the area. They checked the bridge, the woods on both sides, and the road leading away. There were no skid marks, no debris, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Daniel and his cruiser had been erased from the road. By midnight, every available officer was searching. Flashlights scanned the trees. Spotlights swept the river, but there was nothing. Officer Daniel Harris had vanished. When the first officers reached the bridge, their headlights cut through the night. They expected to see Daniel's patrol car parked behind a stopped vehicle. Instead, there was nothing. The road was empty. The only sound was the hum of insects and the river rushing below. They spread out quickly. Flashlights scanned the steel beams of the bridge, the guardrails, the ditches on both sides. Still nothing. No patrol car. No Daniel. The search team looked for any sign of what happened. Skid marks, broken glass, pieces of metal, anything that could show there had been a crash. But the pavement was smooth and undisturbed, like no car had ever been there. They checked the woods around the bridge, stepping carefully through weeds and mud. Radios buzzed with updates, but every call came back the same. Negative. Nothing found. The river was searched, too. Officers shined spotlights across the black water. Rescue crews even dragged parts of the shoreline. Still, no one found a single clue. It was as if Daniel and his cruiser had simply vanished into the air. The silence was heavy. Seasoned officers shook their heads in disbelief. Cars break down, radios fail, people leave footprints. But this was impossible. By dawn, the search grew larger, but the results stayed the same. No car, no officer, no trace. Daniel Harris had disappeared without leaving behind a single piece of evidence. By morning, the news had reached Daniel's family. His younger brother, Mark, rushed to the station demanding answers. He could barely believe what he was being told. His brother's patrol car was missing. His brother was missing. Mark refused to accept the idea that Daniel had walked away. He knew him too well. Daniel was loyal to his badge, loyal to his family. He had no debts, no secrets, no reason to abandon everything. Mark told investigators flat out, "My brother would never run." He begged police to keep searching, to widen the area, to bring in divers, dogs, anything. For Mark, the idea of giving up was unthinkable. He needed answers. Investigators tried to reassure him, but their own confidence was slipping. They had scoured the bridge, the river, the woods. Nothing. Still, Mark refused to give up hope. As long as Daniel wasn't found, alive or dead, there had to be a chance. And he swore he would not stop until the truth was uncovered. For days after Daniel's disappearance, the search never stopped. Teams dragged the river with heavy cables and nets, pulling up logs, scrap, and debris, but never his car. Officers combed the woods for miles, calling his name into the silence. Every tip was chased, every lead questioned. Still nothing. Weeks passed, and frustration turned to fear. The town began to whisper. Some believed Daniel had seen something that night, something he wasn't supposed to see. Maybe the car he pulled over was more than just a speeder. Maybe it carried drugs, weapons, or dangerous people who wanted him gone. Others thought this was bigger. They whispered about corruption, about people inside the department who didn't want the truth out. If Daniel had uncovered something dirty, maybe his own badge couldn't protect him. Theories spread fast, and with no evidence to shut them down, fear grew. Mothers warned their kids not to go near the bridge. Drivers crossed it quickly, eyes fixed straight ahead. The once routine patrol roads Daniel worked now felt haunted. To the town, it didn't feel like one man had vanished. It felt like something darker had swallowed him whole, and no one knew who might be next. By the end of that summer, the bridge had changed forever. It was no longer just steel and concrete. It had become a ghost story. People said you could still hear the crackle of Daniel's radio late at night, carried on the wind. Some swore they saw flashing lights near the water, even though no car was there. The bridge became a place of whispers. Teenagers dared each other to cross it after dark, but even they admitted it felt wrong. The water below seemed heavier, darker, as if it was hiding something. For Daniel's family, every glance at that bridge was a knife in the chest. His brother Mark couldn't drive past without thinking of the patrol car that never came home. To him, the bridge was no longer part of the town. It was the place that had swallowed his brother. And for the rest of the town, Daniel's disappearance was no longer just a mystery. It was a shadow, a reminder that one of their own, a man in uniform, had vanished right in front of them. And until answers came, that shadow would never lift. From the very beginning, detectives believed something violent had happened to Officer Daniel Harris. A cop doesn't just disappear during a routine traffic stop, so investigators treated the case as foul play. Within hours, roadblocks were set up on every major road leading out of town. Officers stopped cars, searched trunks, and questioned drivers. Anyone who had been near the steel bridge that night was pulled aside and interviewed. Detectives canvassed the area, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they saw or heard anything unusual. Some remembered seeing flashing lights near the bridge. Others claimed they heard nothing at all. The river was dragged again and again. Divers went down searching for Daniel's patrol car. Helicopters flew overhead scanning the banks. Still, there was no trace. Police widened the investigation, pulling highway logs to see what vehicles had passed through that night. They tracked delivery trucks, late-night commuters, and strangers moving through the area. Dozens of names were written down. Everyone became a suspect. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it seemed. There were no signs of a crash, no broken railings, no oil on the pavement. It was as if Daniel had been lifted off the road and taken without a sound. The case was already turning into one of the most baffling disappearances the town had ever seen. Next, police focused on people who might have had a reason to hurt Daniel. They went through years of records, every driver he had ticketed, every drunk he had arrested, every criminal who had faced his strict patrol style. Daniel wasn't cruel, but he was tough, and tough cops make enemies. One by one, these names were called in. Some were bitter. They said Daniel embarrassed them in public or ruined their chances in court. Others laughed nervously, insisting they had no reason to harm him. A few suspects stood out. One man had threatened Daniel after a DUI arrest months earlier. Another was a truck driver who lost his license after being caught speeding. Each gave an alibi, some believable, others shaky, but nothing tied them directly to that night. Detectives pressed harder, asking about the bridge. Did anyone see Daniel there? Did anyone pass him? Every answer was the same, no. Still, suspicion lingered. Some of these men had short tempers. Others ran in circles connected to smuggling or drugs. It wasn't proof, but it painted a dangerous picture. Even after weeks of questioning, investigators couldn't link a single enemy to Daniel's vanishing. He had plenty of people who disliked him, but no one admitted to being there when he disappeared. When outside leads ran dry, detectives turned their attention inward. They began questioning Daniel's fellow officers. Most gave predictable answers. They respected Daniel. They thought he was a good cop. They were just as confused as anyone else. But then a few quietly admitted something unusual. In the weeks before his disappearance, Daniel hadn't seemed like himself. Normally calm and steady, he had been tense, nervous. One officer said Daniel hinted he had seen something strange near the bridge during his patrols. Another said he noticed Daniel writing extra notes in his logbook, but never explained why. Daniel never told anyone exactly what was bothering him. He didn't share details, not even with his closest friends on the force. But it was clear he had noticed something, and it had weighed on him. This left investigators with even more questions. What had Daniel seen? Why didn't he tell anyone? And could that secret be the reason he vanished? It was just enough to plant doubt inside the department. If Daniel's last weeks were filled with stress, maybe he had stumbled onto something dangerous, and maybe someone made sure he never talked about it. At first, every new tip felt like it might be the breakthrough. Someone reported seeing headlights near the bridge. Another claimed to hear shouting. A fisherman swore he spotted tire tracks by the water. But when detectives checked, nothing held up. The fisherman's tire tracks turned out to be old marks from a farm truck. The supposed shouting, neighbors later admitted they weren't sure what night they heard it. Even the headlights report didn't line up with the official timeline. Files filled up with statements, but they contradicted one another. No two stories matched. The evidence log stayed nearly empty. The only solid fact was that Daniel had stopped a car that night. After that, everything went dark. Weeks of searching turned into months. Detectives felt the weight of failure. They dragged the river again, scanned the bridge with new equipment, and checked every junkyard within 100 miles. Nothing. Inside the department, frustration spread. Officers argued over theories. Some believed Daniel was killed and hidden. Others thought he drove away on his own. But without proof, the case was stuck. Every lead collapsed, one after another. It was like chasing smoke. Daniel Harris had vanished, and no amount of effort could bring him back. As the official investigation stalled, new whispers began spreading, not about murder, but about Daniel himself. Some locals claimed Daniel must have cracked under pressure. He worked long hours, held people accountable, and carried the stress of the badge. Maybe he snapped. Others said he might have had debts, gambling, money troubles, maybe even someone blackmailing him. A few took it further, suggesting he had a secret lover and ran off to start a new life. To Daniel's family, these rumors were unbearable. His brother Mark especially fought against them. He told anyone who would listen that Daniel was loyal to his family, to his badge, to his town. He would never abandon his duty. But the truth was hard to defend when there was no evidence either way. With no body, no car, and no answers, people filled the silence with their own stories. And slowly, the case that once felt like a manhunt started to look, at least to some, like a disappearance by choice. The rumors about Daniel walking away spread fast, but no one rejected them harder than his younger brother, Mark. Mark spoke at community meetings, looked reporters in the eye, and told them flat out, Daniel would never run. He said Daniel was the most loyal man he knew, loyal to his family, loyal to his badge, proud of serving his town. Mark reminded people how Daniel had dreamed of being a cop since he was a kid. He reminded them of the long hours, the sacrifices, the pride Daniel carried in wearing the uniform. This was not a man who would throw it away in the middle of the night. To Mark, every rumor felt like an insult. It was easier for some to believe Daniel had run away than to face the truth, that something terrible had happened and no one had stopped it. He pushed detectives to keep searching, to not give up. Even when they grew tired, Mark pressed harder. For him, the mystery wasn't about theories. It was about his brother, and he refused to let Daniel's name fade into a lie. By the end of that year, the investigation had slowed to a crawl. Detectives had no new evidence. Witness tips dried up. Meetings turned into paperwork. Finally, the case was labeled what no family ever wants to hear: cold. But while the file sat in storage, the bridge itself took on a life of its own. People in town couldn't look at it the same way. During the day, drivers crossed it quickly, avoiding the urge to glance over the rails at the river below. At night, it was worse. Few dared to drive across. Some said they felt watched. Others claimed they saw headlights in the fog, flashing on and off with no car in sight. The bridge became a warning, a place parents told their kids to stay away from. Teenagers dared each other to walk across, but even the bravest admitted it felt wrong, like the place was keeping secrets. To Daniel's family, it was torture. Every time they passed, they thought of the unanswered questions, the empty seat at family dinners, the silence where his voice should have been. The town began to move on. Life continued, but the bridge stayed, a constant reminder that one of their own, a cop in uniform, had vanished there without a trace. And until the truth came out, the steel bridge would remain more than just a crossing. It was a shadow, a symbol of failure, a silent marker of a case no one could solve. Even after the police closed the file, the people in town never stopped talking about Daniel Harris. His name kept coming up everywhere, at the diner over breakfast, at bars late at night, even in backyard conversations. It was always the same. No one could believe a cop just vanished without a trace. Everyone had their own version of what really happened. Some swore Daniel had been taken by criminals. Others believed there was corruption, that someone inside the force knew more than they were saying. A few even thought Daniel might still be alive, living far away under a new name. Theories piled up year after year. New families moved in and heard the story for the first time. Old-timers repeated it with fresh details, some true, some made up. Kids grew up hearing that the bridge was haunted by the ghost of a cop who never came home. Even though the official case was cold, the mystery never cooled off. Every strange noise by the river, every unexplained light on the bridge, someone would say, "That's Daniel." To the town, it wasn't just an old, unsolved case. It was a legend that refused to die, and with every passing year, the rumors only grew louder. Of all the theories, one stood out more than the rest. People said Daniel had pulled over the wrong car on the wrong night. The back roads near the river weren't just used by locals. Rumors spread that drug runners used them too, moving shipments late at night to avoid attention. It was dangerous work, and no one who crossed their path was safe. Locals whispered that maybe Daniel had stopped one of those cars. Maybe he saw something in the trunk he wasn't supposed to see. If that was true, the men inside wouldn't have let him walk away. The idea made sense to many people. It explained why Daniel's car vanished. It explained why no evidence was left behind. If professionals were involved, they knew how to cover their tracks. The problem was, no proof ever surfaced. Police records showed no suspicious traffic stops that night beyond Daniel's. No one ever admitted to moving drugs in the area back then. But the lack of proof didn't stop the story from spreading. For years, the theory of the wrong car became the most popular explanation. And in town, people repeated it like fact. Daniel Harris had pulled over the wrong people, and he paid the price. Not all the theories pointed at criminals. Some pointed straight at the police. A rumor began to spread that Daniel had discovered something inside the department, something dirty, maybe payoffs, maybe officers protecting certain criminals, maybe even deals made to look the other way on smuggling runs. The story went like this. Daniel found proof and started asking questions. He planned to report it, but before he could, someone on the inside made sure he stayed quiet forever. This idea tore the town apart. Some people believed it fully. They said it explained why the search around the bridge was so sloppy, why no real evidence was ever collected, why files seemed incomplete. Others defended the police, saying it was nonsense. They insisted Daniel's fellow officers cared about him and would never harm one of their own. The truth never came out, but the rumor stuck. Every time someone looked at the badge, they wondered if Daniel's biggest threat wasn't on the road. It was standing right beside him. And that possibility left a shadow over the entire department, one that never really went away. While some theories painted Daniel as a victim, others painted him as a man who walked away. Over the years, strangers claimed to spot him in far-off places. A gas station worker in Oklahoma said a man in uniform came in late at night, looking just like Daniel. A trucker swore he saw him walking down a highway in Texas. In a small town in Nevada, a bartender told travelers that a quiet man with the same face had been living nearby. Each story was different, but together they fueled the idea that maybe Daniel hadn't died at all. Maybe he chose to leave. Maybe he started a new life where no one knew him. To many in town, this sounded easier to believe than murder. It made the story less dark, less final. But to Daniel's family, it felt cruel. They knew Daniel's character. They knew he would never abandon his duty or his loved ones. Still, every new sighting kept the rumor alive. It didn't matter that none were proven or that timelines didn't match. To people hungry for answers, anything was possible. And so, the ghost of Daniel Harris lived on, not just in memory, but in stories of a man spotted on highways and in bars, always just out of reach. Daniel's younger brother never accepted the rumors. He couldn't stand hearing people say Daniel ran away or that he was part of something dirty. To him, Daniel was loyal, proud, and fearless. If the police weren't going to solve the case, then he would. He started collecting everything he could: old case files, news clippings, police reports. He tracked down people Daniel had arrested years earlier, asking if they knew anything. Most of them laughed him off. A few grew nervous when his name came up, but no one ever confessed to knowing what happened. He interviewed witnesses who had been on the bridge the night Daniel vanished. Some remembered details, but nothing solid. He even confronted former suspects directly, hoping guilt would force the truth out. It never worked. Every lead seemed to fall apart. Every trail went cold. But Daniel's brother refused to quit. He told anyone who would listen, "I don't care how long it takes. I'll keep asking until I find the truth." As the years dragged on, the bridge itself took on a life of its own. People said it was cursed, that it held the secret of what happened to Daniel Harris. Drivers swore that on foggy nights they saw headlights appear at one end of the bridge, only for them to vanish halfway across. Locals said it was Daniel's patrol car, replaying its final ride again and again. Teenagers dared each other to walk across the bridge at midnight, whispering that if you stopped in the middle, you could hear a police radio crackle in the dark. Some even claimed they heard a man's voice calling for backup. It didn't matter that none of it could be proven. The story spread, and soon the bridge wasn't just a piece of old steel over water. It was a place of fear. To the people of town, Daniel hadn't just vanished. He had become part of the bridge itself. And every whisper, every sighting, every strange sound only deepened the mystery of what happened that night. In the beginning, Daniel's case was front-page news. Every paper printed updates. Every reporter wanted the latest detail. The town followed along closely, waiting for a breakthrough. But as months turned into years, the updates slowed. With no evidence and no answers, there was nothing new to report. Reporters moved on to fresh crimes, new scandals, and other stories that sold papers. Daniel's disappearance slowly slipped out of the spotlight. By the 10-year mark, his name was rarely mentioned outside of his family. A few anniversaries got small blurbs in the back pages, but even those stopped after a while. To the public, the case became old history. For his family, though, the silence was unbearable. Every quiet day without news was another reminder that Daniel's fate remained hidden. His brother, still fighting to keep the case alive, begged the media to keep talking about it. Most of the time, no one listened. The rest of the world had moved on. But for the people who loved Daniel Harris, the pain never went away. They were trapped in a story with no ending, and no one else seemed to care anymore. By 2003, the old steel bridge was no secret to anyone in town. People had been talking about it for years. Rust ate at the beams. Cracks lined the concrete. Some bolts were missing altogether. Every time a heavy truck rumbled across, the bridge shuddered like it might give out. Locals complained at town meetings. Drivers told officials the bridge was unsafe. Parents warned their kids not to walk across it at night. Everyone agreed something had to be done. But year after year, nothing happened. Inspectors wrote reports. Officials promised repairs, then claimed there wasn't enough money. Temporary patches were made, but the real problems were ignored. The bridge kept standing, but no one trusted it. People joked bitterly that the bridge was held together by paint and prayers. Others said it looked like a skeleton, rotting away but still clinging to life. Some avoided it altogether, driving miles out of their way just to stay safe. Still, the bridge was the main crossing over the river, and most had no choice but to use it. Each trip across came with a knot in the stomach. Everyone knew the truth. It was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. On a stormy evening in 2003, that time finally came. Rain hammered the town. Lightning flashed over the water. Wind whipped through the valley, shaking the old bridge with every gust. Drivers braved the storm, headlights glowing faintly through the sheets of rain. Then came a sound no one could ignore, a deep, groaning roar from the steel frame. The bridge twisted, its supports bending under the weight. Bolts snapped like gunshots. Cracks tore wider across the concrete. And then all at once, the bridge gave way. Steel beams dropped. Concrete slabs ripped free. In seconds, the massive structure folded in on itself and plunged into the black water below. Cars that had been crossing went down with it. Headlights flashed wildly, then disappeared into the river's current. Screams mixed with the roar of the collapse, then were swallowed by the storm. Sirens wailed as rescue crews raced through flooded streets. Boats were launched. Divers prepared to search. The night that had begun as just another storm turned into a disaster the town would never forget. Sirens cut through the storm as police, fire, and rescue crews sped toward the collapsed bridge. Red and blue lights flashed across the rain-soaked streets. People living nearby rushed out of their homes, staring in shock at the broken skeleton of steel sinking into the river. On the water, chaos unfolded. Some cars bobbed for a moment before slipping beneath the current. Divers jumped in, fighting against violent waves and blinding rain. Their flashlights sliced through the black water, searching for trapped drivers. Every second mattered. Boats swayed dangerously as crews pulled survivors from the wreckage. Shivering, bleeding, and terrified, people were hauled onto decks and rushed to shore. The air filled with the sounds of screaming, shouting, and the desperate orders of rescuers trying to keep control. On the riverbank, families gathered in the downpour. Some had loved ones who were on the bridge only minutes earlier. They clutched each other, praying out loud, begging for names from rescuers. Emergency lights flickered across their faces, each one pale with fear. The night felt endless, a blur of sirens, engines, and thunder. For the town, it was the worst disaster they had ever seen. When the last survivor was pulled from the river, the rescue mission shifted. Now it was about cleanup and recovery. The storm had calmed, but the river was still swollen and fierce. Massive cranes rolled into place. Heavy cables dropped into the water, hooking twisted beams and shattered concrete. Engines groaned as machines dragged the broken pieces of the bridge up onto the shore. Each haul revealed new wreckage, sometimes mangled car parts, sometimes chunks of steel bent like paper. Workers fought against thick mud that sucked at their boots and slowed every movement. The debris shifted underfoot, sharp edges cutting through gloves and clothes. Divers guided the machines from below, pointing out what was too dangerous to move quickly. Every hour uncovered something new, from the messed tires, broken glass, even entire vehicles that had gone down with the collapse. The scale of destruction stunned everyone. But as the cleanup dragged on, workers began noticing something strange. Beneath layers of mud and steel, deeper than the fresh wreckage, there seemed to be something older, something that didn't belong to the collapse. During the long cleanup, one worker froze. Sticking out from the mud was something that didn't fit. It looked like the roof of a car, flat, rounded, and buried deep. At first, he assumed it was just another vehicle that had gone down during the collapse, but something felt wrong. He waved for the crane operator to stop and pointed. More debris was cleared away, and the outline of the vehicle slowly took shape. The angles were different from the cars that had fallen in 2003. The roof was too square, the lines too old. Rescue workers gathered, staring at the half-buried wreck. Mud coated the metal, making it almost impossible to tell what it was. But they all agreed, this didn't match anything pulled from the collapse. The worker who spotted it shook his head. "This thing's been down there longer than the bridge," he muttered. Everyone paused. That thought was terrifying. Why would there be another car, one no one knew about, lying under the bridge all this time? And if it had been there for years, what could be inside? The cleanup was no longer just about recovery. It had become a mystery. When the cranes pulled back more twisted beams, the truth was undeniable. The strange vehicle wasn't from 2003. It was far older. Its frame was rusted almost to dust. Whole sections of the body had crumbled, eaten away by years under the water. The windshield was gone, the doors sealed shut by layers of silt. Every inch of it screamed of another time. The crew knew exactly what they were looking at. A car that had gone into the river long before the bridge gave way. Somehow, for nearly 2 decades, it had stayed hidden beneath tons of steel and mud. Divers circled the wreck, shining lights into the murky interior. Their radios crackled with tension as they tried to make out details, but the mud and rust were too thick. Still, one fact was clear. This wasn't just another vehicle pulled down by the storm. This car carried a much older story, a story no one was expecting to uncover. And soon, the workers would realize just how big that story was. It didn't take long for news to leak. Workers couldn't keep a secret this big, not in a small town. Soon, whispers spread across streets, diners, and schools. An old car had been found under the bridge. By morning, dozens of people stood along the riverbank, straining for a look at the half-buried shell. Some pointed, others argued. Everyone had the same question. Could this be connected to the missing cop from 1985? 18 years earlier, Officer Daniel Harris had vanished on this very bridge. No car, no trace. People remembered the search, the theories, the endless rumors. Now, staring at the rusted roof poking through the mud, those memories came flooding back. Families leaned over the guardrails. Kids asked their parents why so many people were watching the water. Reporters showed up with cameras, shoving microphones toward anyone willing to guess what the wreck could be. The sheriff ordered the crowds to back away, warning that nothing had been confirmed. But it didn't matter. The story had already taken on a life of its own. To the town, there was only one possibility. After 18 years of silence, the river was finally giving up its secret. The sheriff called in divers to prepare for recovery. Heavy cables were lowered into the water, disappearing into the thick, dark river. Divers worked slowly, wrapping straps around the wreck while fighting the current. Radios crackled with short updates, their voices tense. On the riverbank, a crowd had gathered. Families, reporters, and old neighbors lined up, whispering about what they were about to see. For many, this was more than just cleanup from a collapsed bridge. It felt like the answer to an old wound. Engines roared as the crane lifted. Slowly, the wreck shifted. Mud poured off the roof as the car broke free from the riverbed for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The metal groaned, rust flacking away, as the vehicle rose higher. When it cleared the surface, gasps erupted from the crowd. At first, it was impossible to tell what kind of car it had been. Layers of mud and rust covered nearly every inch. But then, as the water drained, the outline became unmistakable. This wasn't a civilian car. The square roof, the heavy frame, the spotlight mount, every detail pointed to one thing. It was a police cruiser, and the town instantly knew what that meant. As the car rested on the riverbank, workers moved in with hoses. They sprayed sheets of mud off the body, clearing decades of grime. Piece by piece, the vehicle's past began to show itself. The faded black and white paint came into focus. The spotlight on the driver's side door was still attached, though broken in half. The red and blue bar lights were shattered, their glass eaten by rust. Every detail confirmed it. This was a patrol unit. But which one? Cleanup crews leaned close to the side panels. At first, nothing was visible but streaks of brown. Then, as more water blasted away the muck, faint white numbers appeared. They were chipped, almost gone, but still there. The sheriff stepped forward, eyes locked on the numbers. He didn't need a second look. He recognized them immediately. It was the exact patrol number belonging to Officer Daniel Harris, the traffic cop who had vanished in 1985. Gasps spread through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. Families clutched each other, staring in disbelief. For 18 years, no one knew what had happened. Now, staring at that patrol number, the truth could no longer be denied. Daniel's cruiser had finally been found. Once the cruiser was secure on the riverbank, investigators moved in. Every step was careful, as if the car itself might fall apart at their touch. The metal was rusted through, its hinges barely holding. Still, they had to look inside. With slow, steady hands, one officer slid a crowbar against the driver's side door. The corroded steel groaned, flakes of orange rust breaking off and falling into the mud. A second officer helped, and finally, with a loud crack, the door creaked open. The smell hit first, a heavy, stale odor of river water and decay that had been trapped for nearly 2 decades. Flashlights pierced the darkness inside, revealing what the water had hidden. Across the floor, old equipment lay scattered. A dented flashlight, a swollen, waterlogged radio, a pair of handcuffs still clipped to a broken holder. And then, the detail that froze everyone in place. Clipped neatly to the driver's seat, still hanging on the torn fabric, was a badge. Its shine was dulled by years underwater, but the engraving was clear enough. It belonged to Officer Daniel Harris. There was no longer any doubt. This was his car. As the beam of a flashlight swept across the interior, silence fell over the entire recovery team. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone whispered, "There's someone inside." In the driver's seat, slumped but still upright, were human remains. The bones were brittle, yellowed from years submerged, yet still arranged in the shape of a man behind the wheel. A skull tilted slightly forward, empty sockets staring into nothing. Fragments of fabric clung stubbornly to the skeleton. The scraps were dark blue, eaten by water and time, but unmistakable, a police uniform. Daniel Harris had never left his cruiser. He had been sitting here all along. A leather duty belt hung across the lap bones, its holster still holding the rusted outline of a sidearm. The sight was so haunting, so final, that even the seasoned officers turned away. After 18 years of rumors, stories, and false leads, the truth was sitting in that driver's seat. Daniel Harris had not run. He had not disappeared into thin air. He had died here, alone, beneath the bridge. Investigators leaned closer, their flashlights steady but their hands shaking. The scene inside the cruiser spoke louder than words. Daniel's duty belt was still fastened tight, buckled across his lap like he had been ready for duty even in his final moments. His holster was waterlogged, the weapon inside eaten away by rust, but it was clear he had never even drawn it. Whatever happened that night, Daniel had not had the chance to fight back. Then their eyes shifted to his chest. There, clinging to the shredded uniform, was his badge. The once bright silver was dulled by years underwater, but the engraving was still visible. Officer Daniel Harris. That badge was more than a piece of metal. It was proof. Proof that he had stayed at his post. Proof that he had not abandoned his oath. The silence among investigators was heavy. For years, some had believed Daniel had walked away. But here he was, strapped to his seat, his badge over his heart and his duty belt locked in place. This was no runaway. This was a cop who had died still wearing the symbols of his duty. When word of the discovery spread, Daniel's family rushed to the scene. His younger brother was among the first to arrive. For nearly 2 decades, he had fought against every rumor, every whisper that Daniel had left by choice. Now, standing before the rusted cruiser, the truth hit with brutal force. As he looked inside and saw the badge, the belt, and the skeleton of his brother, he broke down. Years of frustration, anger, and hope collapsed all at once. His sobs carried across the crowd gathered on the riverbank. Neighbors, old friends, and townspeople stood in silence. Many had doubted, many had spread stories, but now the proof was undeniable. The mystery that had haunted the town was no legend. It was real, and it had been hidden in the river all along. For Daniel's family, the discovery was the worst moment of their lives. They finally had an answer, but it was one that shattered their hearts. The discovery should have brought peace, but instead, it raised more questions than answers. Investigators and townspeople gathered by the river, staring at the rusted cruiser. How could it have been sitting beneath the bridge for 18 years without anyone finding it? Back in 1985, police had dragged the water, run boats along the surface, even sent divers down. Yet somehow, Daniel's car had been missed. Was it incompetence? A mistake that let the truth stay buried for nearly 2 decades? Or was it something darker? Was the search deliberately cut short? The family asked the same questions. If the car was there all along, how had it escaped notice? Had someone hidden it better after the first searches ended? And the most haunting question of all, was Daniel's death an accident, or had someone forced him off that bridge? The damage to the car, the way it was positioned, left room for theories. Did he lose control during the stop, or had another vehicle rammed him, sending him plunging into the river with no way out? The truth was still locked in the mud, waiting. Investigators promised answers, but for Daniel's family, the horror had only just begun. The moment Daniel's cruiser was pulled from the river, the cold case file was reopened. Detectives who weren't even on the force in 1985 now carried the weight of solving it. They went down into storage rooms, opening dusty evidence boxes that hadn't been touched in nearly 2 decades. Inside were faded photographs, old witness statements, and handwritten reports that ended with the same line: no evidence located. But now there was evidence, real physical proof that Daniel never ran away. The discovery of his body inside the patrol car forced everyone to admit what his family had always known. He died in the line of duty. Investigators vowed to finish what their predecessors failed to do. They formed a new task force, combining local officers with state investigators and forensic experts. Every piece of the old case was laid out on tables: maps of the bridge, transcripts of dispatch calls, and names of every person Daniel had stopped in the weeks before he vanished. The mission was clear: find out who forced Daniel Harris into that river. For the first time in 18 years, the truth felt within reach. The patrol car, rusted and broken, was delivered to a secure lab. Forensic teams treated it like a crime scene frozen in time. They scraped mud from the frame, examined dents, and tested metal fractures. Slowly, the story began to take shape. The damage wasn't random. Experts noted the car had been struck hard on the driver's side rear bumper. The angle of the impact suggested another vehicle had forced it sideways, pushing Daniel off the road and into the river. It wasn't the kind of damage caused by skidding or losing control. It was deliberate. Even more chilling, divers returned to the riverbed to search the collapsed site again. Under thick layers of silt, they found tire impressions still preserved in the mud. These marks lined up with the theory of another vehicle being present that night. Back in 1985, the tools and science weren't advanced enough to detect this. But in 2003, the evidence told a clear story. Daniel didn't just drive into the water. Someone made sure he never came back out. The forensic findings left no room for doubt. Daniel didn't lose control that night. His cruiser had been hit. The marks on the frame showed a violent collision from behind and to the side, exactly where a pursuing vehicle could shove him off balance. Investigators reconstructed the moment. Daniel pulls a car over near the steel bridge. Another vehicle, maybe tied to the one he stopped, circles back. With one hard strike to the rear bumper, Daniel's cruiser is shoved off the narrow shoulder. In seconds, it breaks through the guardrail and plunges into the river below. The theory explained everything. It explained why there were no skid marks on the road. Daniel never had the chance to brake or fight for control. It explained why the radio went silent mid-call. He was blindsided before he could even react. And it explained why he never escaped the vehicle. Being forced into the water at high speed left no time to unbuckle, no chance to open a door. The image was chilling. Daniel Harris, a loyal officer, didn't vanish into thin air. He was deliberately pushed off the road, trapped inside his patrol car and swallowed by the river. The next question haunted investigators. Why wasn't Daniel's car found back in 1985? Records showed divers had been sent into the river after his disappearance. Boats had scanned the water. Search teams insisted they combed the bridge area carefully. But the truth was clear now. The cruiser had been there the entire time. How could trained searchers have missed a full-sized patrol car sitting beneath the bridge? Some detectives pointed to incompetence. The 1985 search had been rushed, limited by poor visibility and outdated equipment. Maybe divers didn't go deep enough. Maybe sonar wasn't used properly. But others weren't so sure. Whispered theories spread again, this time inside the investigation itself. Could someone in authority have wanted Daniel's car to stay hidden? Was evidence deliberately ignored to protect someone? The case file even showed troubling details. Areas marked as cleared had never been fully documented. Notes were vague, and key officers involved had since retired. Whether it was sloppy work or something darker, the result was the same. Daniel Harris's car lay beneath the bridge for 18 years, while his family was told there were no answers. With proof that Daniel's death wasn't an accident, detectives turned back to his old case files. They combed through traffic stops, arrests, and reports from his final weeks on duty. Dozens of names surfaced, but one group kept standing out. It was a small network suspected of smuggling across state lines. They weren't flashy criminals, but they were smart, organized, and careful. Locals whispered about them for years, yet arrests rarely stuck. They used the quiet river roads and old highways, exactly the areas Daniel patrolled. Daniel had written multiple tickets connected to this group. Minor stops, speeding, broken lights, expired tags. On paper, nothing unusual. But detectives noticed a pattern. Each stop involved vehicles later linked to the same smuggling network. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered FBI notes from the 1980s suggesting the group was moving more than stolen goods. Drugs, weapons, even cash shipments were suspected. If Daniel had stumbled across one of these runs, it would have made him a problem they couldn't ignore. The possibility was chilling. Daniel Harris, the straight arrow traffic cop, may have crossed paths with men who lived in the shadows, and those men had every reason to make him disappear. The deeper detectives dug, the the clearer the picture became. Just days before Daniel vanished, records showed he pulled over a truck late at night on one of the back roads near the river. The stop seemed routine. He cited the driver for a busted tail light, but investigators now believe that stop was anything but routine. The truck was registered to a man with suspected ties to the smuggling network. At the time, no one connected the dots, but looking back, it was a red flag. Detectives pieced together a theory. Daniel, while checking the truck, may have noticed something unusual. Maybe he saw hidden compartments. Maybe he overheard something on the radio. Whatever it was, it might have revealed the group's entire operation. That meant Daniel wasn't just a local cop writing tickets anymore. To the smugglers, he became a threat to their business. And threats had to be dealt with. The timing matched too well to ignore. Within days of stopping that truck, Daniel was gone, his car forced off the bridge, his body sealed in silence for 18 years. For investigators, it felt less like a theory, and more like the truth finally surfacing. By 2003, investigators had their theory locked in. Daniel Harris hadn't vanished by choice, and he hadn't lost control of his car. He had been murdered, forced into the river for doing his job. But as strong as the theory was, it came nearly 2 decades too late. The men tied to the smuggling ring were no longer around. Some had died years earlier, lost to violence, drugs, or accidents. Others had vanished, slipping across state lines and leaving no trace. A few were still alive, but too far out of reach for charges to stick. Witnesses had faded. Records were gone. Any chance of a trial had disappeared with time. For investigators, it was frustrating. They had answers, but not justice. They could explain what happened, but they couldn't punish the men who had done it. For Daniel's family, it was worse. His younger brother stood in front of reporters and said what everyone was already thinking. This was both the truth and the wound that never heals. They finally knew why Daniel never came home. They finally understood the secret buried beneath the bridge. But the killers who had taken him would never sit in a courtroom. The case closed, but closure never came. In the fall of 2003, Daniel Harris was finally laid to rest. 18 years after he vanished, his family could bury him with full honors. The service drew people from every corner of town. It wasn't just a funeral, it was a reckoning. Police officers lined the streets in uniform, standing shoulder to shoulder. Their cruisers formed a long line, lights flashing silently in tribute. Bagpipes played as the casket was carried out, draped in the American flag. For years, rumors and whispers had surrounded Daniel's name. But on this day, there was no doubt. He was honored as a fallen officer who never quit his post. The sound of the pipes carried over the crowd. Some people cried openly, others stood with heads bowed. Even those who once believed the runaway stories came to pay their respects. The town that had once moved on without him was now united in grief and pride. For Daniel's parents, the pain was fresh. For his younger brother, the moment was crushing. But it was also the first time in 18 years that they could stand with the truth. Daniel Harris hadn't left them. He had been taken. And now he was finally home. When the service reached its quietest moment, Daniel's younger brother stepped up to the podium. The room was filled with silence, broken only by the sound of his voice. He looked out at the sea of uniforms, the townspeople, and his own family. Then he said what had weighed on him for almost 2 decades. My brother didn't run away. He didn't abandon his badge. He didn't abandon this town. He died protecting it. The words cut through the air. For years, people had whispered stories that Daniel had left by choice. Some thought he cracked under pressure. Others believed he ran off to start a new life. But his brother refused to let that be the ending. He was proud of this badge, he said, holding Daniel's worn police emblem in his hand. He was proud to serve here, and because of that pride he lost his life. The crowd sat in silence, many with tears in their eyes. The rumors that had haunted the Harris family for nearly 20 years finally lost their power. For the first time, the truth was spoken where everyone could hear it. Daniel's legacy was no longer mystery. It was sacrifice. As the funeral ended, the crowd moved slowly toward the cemetery. Hundreds of people followed the flag-draped casket. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of shoes on gravel and the soft weeping of family and strangers alike. People who once doubted Daniel now walked side by side with those who had defended him from the beginning. Years earlier, the town had been divided by rumors. Some believed he had run, others believed he was killed. But standing at his grave, those arguments no longer mattered. Every shop owner, every teacher, every neighbor seemed to be there. Police from nearby towns came to stand in salute. Even old classmates who hadn't seen Daniel in decades returned. The weight of the moment united them. When the casket was lowered, the silence deepened. It wasn't just grief, it was respect. 18 years of questions had ended here, with proof of who Daniel really was. In that moment, the town finally saw him clearly. Not a runaway, not a mystery, but an officer who stayed at his post until the end. And together, standing shoulder to shoulder, the community carried that truth with them. After the collapse, crews worked for months to clear the twisted wreckage of the old steel bridge. Bit by bit, steel beams and crumbled concrete were pulled away, leaving only the empty gap across the river. For many, that emptiness felt symbolic. Daniel had vanished there, and for years so had the truth. But soon construction began. Massive cranes lifted new beams into place. Fresh concrete was poured. Slowly, a new bridge began to rise. This time it wasn't just about transportation, it was about memory. When the project finished, the town gathered again, just as they had for Daniel's funeral. Officials unveiled a plaque at the bridge's entrance. It carried Daniel Harris's name, etched in steel. From that day forward, the crossing was no longer just a structure over water. It was a memorial. Families who drove across would point to the plaque and tell their children the story. Travelers who passed through would see the name and ask who Daniel was. And the answer would always be the same. He was the officer who gave everything to protect his town. The bridge became more than a way forward. It became a promise to never forget. The new bridge opened with a ceremony unlike any the town had ever seen. Flags lined the road. Police cars formed an escort. Families gathered on both sides of the river, waiting for the ribbon to be cut. At the center stood Daniel's younger brother, holding the scissors. His hands shook as he looked out at the crowd. Faces of neighbors, officers, children who had grown up only hearing stories of Daniel. The mayor stepped forward and made the announcement. From that day forward, the structure would no longer be known by its old name. It would carry a new one, Harris Bridge. Applause filled the air, but it was heavy with emotion. As Daniel's brother cut the ribbon, tears ran down his face. For 18 years, he had carried the weight of unanswered questions. Now, at least, his brother's name would never fade. A bronze plaque was unveiled at the entrance. Etched in steel were the words, Officer Daniel Harris, 1952–1985. He gave his life in service to this town. The bridge wasn't just concrete and steel anymore. It was history, it was memory, and it would carry Daniel's name forever. For Daniel's family, the dedication brought mixed emotions. The honor was real, the respect was real, but no ceremony could erase the pain of losing him. His parents never lived to see the answers they had begged for. His brother, now older, carried both relief and sorrow. At least now there were no more rumors. No more whispers about runaway theories or secret lives. The truth was known. Daniel had been forced off the road. He hadn't abandoned anyone. He had been taken because he did his job. The family found some peace in that clarity. They could finally bury him, visit his grave, and cross the bridge with his name. But healing was different. Healing didn't mean forgetting. In interviews, Daniel's brother often repeated the same line. The truth ends the questions, but it doesn't end the hurt. Even years later, when people drove across Harris Bridge, they slowed down. Parents told their children about the officer who vanished, and how it took almost 2 decades to bring him home. For the town, the mystery was solved. For the family, the wound remained. But at least at long last, the truth had been written in stone. Today, Harris Bridge looks like any other stretch of road. Cars roll across it every morning and evening. School buses rumble over the steel. Trucks carry goods across the river without a second thought. To outsiders, it's just a bridge. But for locals, it's something different. Every time they cross, they feel the weight of the past. They remember the officer who vanished here, and the 18 years his family spent begging for answers. They remember the moment in 2003 when a storm tore the old bridge apart and the river finally gave up its secret. Some drivers admit they still glance at the water as they pass. They picture the rusted cruiser, hidden for nearly 2 decades beneath the current. They think about Daniel Harris, sitting in that car, never given a chance to fight back. Parents tell the story to their kids. Teachers bring it up in class when talking about local history. For the town, Harris Bridge is more than a road. It's a reminder. A reminder that one of their own gave everything, and for too long, no one knew why. Even today, as headlights move across its surface, people remember. Daniel Harris never walked away. He was taken.